We reconvene for Liberty Conspiracy Live here on Rockfin and on Twitter. I'm Gardner Goldsmith. Thank you for joining me on this, the 24th day of February 2023. If you're joining us on Twitter, please head on over. You've got an open invite to join us in Rockfin and hang out with the chat gang in Rockfin. Because freedom is out of fashion nowadays, we are a conspiracy plotting and planning for the inevitable day of the downfall of the state. Yes, perhaps somewhere on the globe that will happen. I'll be joining the Rockfin chat really soon to check out what's happening over there and say hi to everybody. And I really appreciate everybody hanging out with me last night. Had a great time last night with the guests in our Mind Meld. Tell you a little bit more about how to find those guys if you missed last night's program. Right now, I want to give you the info about what we're going to be discussing tonight on the program, because, in fact, it's turned out to be a very fortuitous couple days. How is that, you say? How is that, old shaven-headed one? Well, because we had such great guests last night, I took about half of the program and just shifted it forward to today, thinking I think I'll be able to hit some of these stories because they sort of have some long-term intellectual ammunition to allow people to take that info with them based on some of these stories. And it turns out that by waiting on a couple of those stories, I actually can amplify on them tonight because there's new information that folds right in with them. So let's check out what's going on our schedule for tonight. We're going to be looking at our news flash, and tonight we're going to have a special addition to the news flash. My buddy Eric Shiner, the director of MRC TV, he has his Wacky Mole every Friday, and we're going to be looking at his latest Wacky Mole, which I think is just superior. He did a fantastic job on it. I really can't wait to show you that one. Also, we're going to be talking about government train ping pong. And by that, I obviously mean the political ping pong, but also some informational ping pong. So we'll talk about that. That, of course, pertaining to what happened with the rail accident in East Palestine, Ohio, and the response of the government, the response of Donald Trump, the response of the people responding to the people responding to the people responding on infinitum. It just goes on and on. Then we'll be talking about Kamala Harris. And this is one of the things I wanted to discuss last night. And now we get to roll right into it because she had some statements that tie very closely in with the erroneous, bald-faced lies, I should say, of Joe Biden during his State of the Onion address recently, where he claimed that the economy was so much better. So I did a piece for MRC TV about that at the time, and a lot of other people went through and fact-checked him, and they showed where he was not being truthful. And it turns out that Kamala Harris has basically repeated these kinds of lies, and in addition to that, they are hiding a major item that is also an error of Donald Trump's, and it has to do with the tariffs. So we'll tell you about that because it pertains to one particular portion of what Kamala Harris had to say. So we'll get into that, as well as talking about the United States engaging in Soviet tactics as they impose sanctions and seize the property of Russians. So it's amazing to think how whatever state you're in, eventually the government is going to do so many of the things that you thought only foreign governments were doing to their people. But yes, they are doing it again in the United States. And we'll be talking about the warmongering increasing in the United States. But at the same time, we'll discuss some folks in Washington, D.C. who are actually standing up against this, which is kind of nice, in addition to the D.C. protesters who were down there on Sunday. And I want to draw your attention, if I have the opportunity, to the folks at Jimmy Dore's show. And I might have to put out a special show about this because Jimmy Dore did a fantastic job. In fact, I might just go search for it on the air. Because I want to show you this segment from Jimmy Dore's program, and I tweeted about this, where they highlighted what Rachel Maddow was saying about the D.C. In fact, if you got to see David Knight's show today, David Knight and Gerald Celente talked about this a little bit. And it was just unbelievable what Rachel Maddow had to say about the peace protesters and what she had to say about Tulsi Gabbard, a person whom she had praised when Tulsi Gabbard was first elected. And she had spoken about her. And this time on Sunday, when Tulsi Gabbard was there, didn't even acknowledge her name, didn't mention that she was a former congresswoman. All she said was an occasional fill-in host for Tucker Carlson. Didn't mention that the woman had her own military experience. None of that. Because, of course, Tulsi Gabbard is speaking up against the United States aggression through NATO into Ukraine against Russia for years. They've been doing that. And, of course, it's not applauding the Russian actions to acknowledge the United States participation along with NATO in the overthrow of Ukraine. And by the way, there was another very, very good piece. I should try to find this one too, from Greg Reese, where he uses some of the footage from Oliver Stone's 2 Ukraine films to really lay out what the United States was involved with, to leave a preposition dangling, in Ukraine going back many years to late 2013 and the coup that the United States brought about when Yanukovych, the elected president at that time, was not going to accept NATO, US, UN, EU approaches to become their pals. And instead, he turned more towards Russia and made a deal with Russia for about $12 billion in aid and energy trade. That was in late fall, early winter of 2013. And at that point, the United States, they were ready. They overthrew them. And you saw what happened in 2014. And then tonight, we're going to be talking about fiction as well. We'll discuss my friend F. Paul Wilson, some of his background, and we're going to read a fantastic story by F. Paul Wilson, one of many fantastic stories I look forward to reading. So, all right, let's get started, everybody, with our news flash. Yeah, the news flash. And first off, let's go to Canada and give a little tip of the hat. And here it is, a tip of the hat to the redacted team. They are, of course, Clayton and Natalie Morris, and they're covering something about C-18 in Canada. Now, you're probably familiar with C-16, which actually passed in C-17. That's the mandated pronoun thing that Jordan Peterson protested, and of course that shined even more light on a guy who was already pretty well liked on YouTube for his videos on totalitarianism and philosophy and psychology. But as a professor at the University of Toronto, he would have been forced through C-16 to have to use pronouns that anybody wanted him to use. And he said, look, I'll call them names if they want me to call them nicknames or whatever. He says, I'll take it on a person-by-person basis regarding pronouns, but I will not be dictated to by the government. So here is a little more now. This is C-18, which has not passed, but now they're getting into what they have actually given overtures about this, and now it's getting even stronger because Google is working with the Canadian government. As we discussed last night, I was on the Google blacklist. As you know, we're on also a Microsoft blacklist because of that strategic global disinformation unit. And now Microsoft has split off from them. So I should say we were on a Microsoft advertising blacklist, all sorts of things. So that's MRC TV stuff. So here is the latest from Natalie Morris and Clayton Morris. I'm not going to show all of this because it's a 9-minute video, but I recommend if you get a chance, go to my Twitter feed because you'll hear about this new bill. Again, it hasn't passed yet, but already Google is getting on the bandwagon and they are experimenting with their algorithms to shut off speech if people try to search for certain items from certain websites via Google. And that will have an effect, as it already has, on so many other search engines, because when Google pushes things up in its algorithms, it makes more hits come to those things that are propped up at the top, and that will affect other search engines. So here we go.
All right. Well, we want to tell you about how Canada is not getting access to certain news websites because Google now is testing blocking certain news that Canada doesn't like. The Canadian government last year introduced the Online News Act. This was in the wake of the trucker protest introduced by Justin Trudeau's Liberal government. And it is a way for Canada to downrank and declassify news organizations if they don't like it. And now Google is saying, well, okay, we'll test out doing this, which is interesting that Google would do this. And they admitted to it. A Google spokesperson emailed Reuters and said, we're briefly testing potential product responses to Bill C-18 that impacts a very small percentage of Canadian users. We run thousands of tests each year to assess any potential.
Let's stop it right there. We're briefly testing, let's repeat this. Let's just reiterate this. We're briefly testing potential product responses. In other words, yes, we're engaging in backdoor censoring, and we're not going to tell you what that is, what we're censoring, that impact a very small percentage of Canadian users. In other words, people like Rebel News, people like, Viva Fry, those kinds of people. People like anybody talking about Artur Pawlowski and his brother David. Those people, right? Absolutely. We'll continue with Natalie Morris of Redacted.
Changes to search. Except the bill hasn't passed yet. If you look at the Parliament of Canada website, you can see that it is still being debated in the Senate. So why would Google need to turn off access for Canadians for such a controversial bill that amounts to censorship and the shutting down of a free press? Google says it's only conducting limited tests, only for 4% of the Canadian population, to limit the visibility of Canadian and international news to varying degrees. Lots of questions about that.
That's for
but
sure.
We remind you that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau continues to be antagonistic about who he considers is press, who is legitimate. So this is Google following right in line with him not wanting some sites to be ranked as news if he doesn't like them. Here he was last year slamming Rebel News, telling them exactly what kind of disdain he had for any anti-government dissent.
The only reason that I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government. Do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the Press Gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the importance.
So let's get this straight. This is a debate. This is someone from Rebel News who was able to get in, and the only reason they were able to get in was because they sued. And he's talking about accreditation. She asks him, we were only able to get in. He says, so he passes the buck. And he says, well, accreditation, that is determined by the consortium of journalists, these reliable journalists, all of whom are what? Under pressure from the government, his government. So it's sort of like having a feudal lord. You know, you're going up to the feudal lord saying, can I actually get into the hall to get the food that I picked and you took away from me? Yeah, can I get in there to get some food? Well, you know, that's determined by the Food Eaters Accreditation Board of other farmers and so on, from whom we will also steal and shut down. So, you know, it's really not up to us. It's up to them, the people we threaten, like you.
Important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality is organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadian.
Okay, so I'm going to stop there because did you notice how even Justin Trudeau, he wouldn't call it a media organization, which is exactly what it is. And then he exposes the utilitarian ends justifies the means reality that groups are just assemblages of individuals. He called them a group of individuals, which is exactly what we have been arguing is completely erroneous when people consider groups. He's exposing the fallacy of public health because public is just individuals. It's not anything other than individuals, and it's the government picking and choosing which individuals will be sacrificed for the public, the group. But every individual in there can be a potential target. So he just exposed the fallacy of the group right there. He just did it. And when he's talking about the science, here's an example. I hate the way this computer does this. It drives me nuts. Here's an example of what the mindset is like of the people that he thought should be trusted with the science. Ready? These are the people who trusted the science. This is at a restaurant a while ago, but somebody just recently posted it. And please pardon the language. I won't play all of this. But this is a woman getting very upset about some person's MAGA hat. I could care less about the MAGA hat. Just check this out inside the restaurant. She's at the table of the restaurant. This is one of the trust the science people, the almighty God of science that you can't question, right? Not the actual scientific method, which is always open to debate. No, you've got to go along with what they tell you is the science. That has nothing to do with science. It's follow the commands, is what Justin Trudeau is saying. And of course, his supposed science was proven by people who actually used the scientific method at the time to be completely wrong. And over again since that time, the mask mandate nonsense, the jab nonsense, the numbers on the so-called pandemic, the very term pandemic, all of it, as we knew at the time, was an absolute shibboleth deserving knocking over by people who actually applied their own critical skills, gathered information, and looked at it. And also recognized that their terminology was very slippery and, such as in the United States, they had built-in incentives to inflate the numbers of deaths attributed to this virus. So check out this woman at this restaurant. I'm not going to play it all, and please be forewarned, there's a lot of swearing from this unhinged woman with her Pac-Man sweatshirt on. Yeah, you know, because Arrested Development seems to be very popular for many of the people who just said follow the science because they're so sophisticated.
Do not take a Lord's name in vain. Fuck the fucking God. Fuck God. Fuck God. There is no fucking God. No, there is.
She says there is no effing God, right? And then why is there no effing God? Because he would not have allowed a racist like Donald Trump to become president, right? Check this out. You know the racist who, I mean, you know the whole thing. I'm not supporting Donald Trump in any way whatsoever, but it's very clear. Donald Trump opened up Mar-a-Lago to minorities. He's done a lot of different things for minorities. His son-in-law is Jewish. You know, whatever. Why do you have to even bring that stuff up to try to prove anything? I don't need to defend Donald Trump, but it's just factually wrong. And you know, that it's just, she has bought into the narratives of this sort of racist kind of white supremacist nonsense that is just not provable in any way whatsoever. And so check this out, though. What I want to do is freeze frame on this. Watch this.
Oh, such language. You can't even
Fucking
speak
Trump is
English.
president. There is no goddamn God. Because God would not allow a fucking piece of shit and fucking rapists like that to be goddamn president. A fucking racist.
So there you go. Now, this is it. And I could have frozen the frame anywhere here. So on the table here, you've got her beers, and she's got the mask on in the restaurant. I mean, it's the typical thing. We've heard this all the time. David and I've spoken about it. You've probably been through experiences like this. Like, wait, so you want me to, I'm at the door here. You want me to wear this cheesy thing over my face now to get from here over to there. And then when I sit down, this woman is sitting down. How's she going to get the beer in her mouth? Obviously, she's going to pull the mask down. It's just incredible. These people are just, it just blows my mind. In the meantime, somebody served that to her. A person who's going back and forth, touching his or her mask, along with carrying stuff that other people have touched, all the way down the line, which is most of the time how viruses are spread. People will cough into their hands, they'll blow things into their hands or things like that, and then they'll touch something, someone else will touch it, and it'll get it picked up. Just so stupid, so ridiculously dumb. All right, let's go on to the other ridiculously dumb item. This one, NATO compares Ukrainian war to Harry Potter, Star Wars, Marvel movies. Well, I'm thinking if we do look at the fall of the Republic and Star Wars, they did bring about emergency powers for Senator Palpatine on a vote, sort of like what Donald Trump did through his own executive orders that Joe Biden went along with himself, and that no congressman except for a few like Thomas Massey have spoken up and said are unconstitutional. So maybe it is kind of similar, the loss of freedom. Of course, the princess called it democracy. This is how democracy dies. Well, that's actually what democracy does. It tyrannizes the minority. So I don't see how you're praising democracy all that much there. They could have deserved a better scriptwriter on that. But here it is. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, has been mocked for posting comments on social media comparing Ukraine's war against Russia as a struggle comparable to the likes of Harry Potter, Star Wars, and the Marvel movie franchise. To reiterate the headline I already read and waste time. Sorry. Just one day before the one-year anniversary of the Russian invasion, the official Twitter account for the NATO military alliance has come under criticism for a post that said Ukraine is, quote, hosting one of the great epics of this century, and compared the war to Hollywood movies. The post, which quoted a Ukrainian soldier named Pavlo, said, quote, we are Harry Potter and William Wallace, and Na'vi and Han Solo. We're escaping from Shawshank and blowing up the Death Star. We are fighting with the Harkonnens and challenging Thanos. Okay. You say so. Yeah, that's just, people who just can't, they just don't get reality. The whole thing is being led by an actor. It is such a wag the dog situation. You've got sirens, air raid sirens blaring while an actor walks down the street with a corrupt, multi-decade parasite on the taxpayers of the United States, who somehow has such friends in the media they won't even mention that he was involved in overthrowing the government there through working with neo-Nazis, got his son put on the board of Burisma, and has lied numerous times going back to the 1980s when he ran for president, and even lied about his own college background. The whole thing is just a giant theater of the absurd. It's absolutely nuts. I'm amazed by this. It's stunning. So now let's go over to this one. If you thought it was over, no, it's not. Biden's administration, waiting for this to, Biden's administration's regulations would ban 96% of gas stoves, Republican senator warns. Here we go. Senator Steve Daines, Republican of Montana, warned in a letter to Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm this week that regulations recently proposed by her agency would ban up to 96% of the gas-powered stoves currently available to Americans. What a shocker. Daines noted in the letter sent Wednesday that the Department of Energy, DOE, itself acknowledges that just 4% of the current gas stove market share would meet the stringent rules governing the efficiency levels of gas stoves. Now, I mentioned this previously. I want to mention it again because what people thought was over is not over. This is not over. The DOE, Department of Energy, where that is in their wonderful constitution, I don't know. The DOE issued the proposed rule on February 1st, shortly after the Biden administration was slammed for appearing to move ahead with a gas stove ban. And then, of course, the Biden administration claimed they weren't doing it. So let me bring this down a little bit here. I was getting the cat some food, and we put little fish oil stuff on the cat's food for it's got like chondroitin in it. It's supposed to be good for the joints and stuff like that. But my fingers smell like I've been throwing chum. I realized like, wow man, there's gonna be a shark going after me. We need a bigger boat. Anyway, so yeah, Jennifer Granholm, you remember her? She laughed when she was asked, what the Biden administration could do to lift the boot off the neck of the United States energy producers. And she's like, oh, would that we could do anything? Like, no, actually, you are doing everything you can to stop energy production here. You're controlling lands that the federal government is not supposed to control. Your regulatory state has destroyed refinery capacity in the United States. And of course, you're pushing regulations like this to get rid of gas stoves. But that's okay. It's not a pattern in any way whatsoever, Jennifer. I must just be paranoid. Yeah, I'm like, Black Sabbath must have sung songs about me. The department clearly states in the proposed rule that only 4% of the current market share meet the extremely high new proposed standards, Daines wrote to Granholm. This means that, according to the department's own analysis published in the proposed rule, that 96% of existing gas cooking tops would be banned from future manufacturing and sales. Now, I mentioned before in one of the pieces that I wrote that the Discover Card Corporation is the first of the credit card corporations that's going to be tracking gun shop purchases. And this is something that started in the fall with this international standards organization creating a digital code for gun shop purposes that didn't exist prior to this. And it came, the 6 major credit card companies said that they would agree to start to utilize it sometime this year after they were pressured by the comptroller of New York City that he would pull $1 billion worth of he controls $1 billion worth of investments that split. They are retirement and pension investments, and he was threatening to pull them from these banks. So they responded in part to that, I'm sure, and in part to other forces that I probably don't even know. And Discover Card is the first. And I said, gee, are people going? I wrote this for MRC TV and read it on the show the other day. Are people going to, pull the Boston Tea Party? Because this is an absolute invasion, and it's a circumvention of the Fourth Amendment. The government is going to get this information from the companies, just like the government gets cell phone data from companies now, because they give them immunity from lawsuits from us if we're unhappy with them handing over our personal data on the phone side. So a similar pattern seems to be arising with the credit card companies and gun shop purchases. They don't specify purchases of guns, so it could be anything. If you're just going in to get, say, a new holster or buy some targets or buy some rounds or whatever it might be, buy an instructional booklet or anything like that, going in to shoot some rounds off down in their target range, that will all be flagged by Discover Card now. And I said, are people going to throw their Discover Cards into the harbor the way the revolutionaries, the Sons of Liberty, and Sam Adams leading that, through their tea when the government of Great Britain established the stamp tax, of course the tea tax, but the stamp tax in particular was one of the major problems for them when the British said that they could go into anybody's house to check out to make sure that you had the proper stamps. And those stamps, of course, represented that you had paid a tax. So they had it on paper, they had it on all sorts of things. So I wondered if they would do that. You think people will start throwing their gas stoves into Boston Harbor? I wonder about that big time. Now, I want to welcome you to a really good video. This is on the MRC TV Rumble page right now because the MRC TV YouTube page is currently frozen until the beginning of next week, thanks to YouTube finding one of my videos for MRC TV from October, where I quoted all valid information from the CDC, where they had finally caught up and admitted that the jabs did not give long-term immunity against Cowabunga 19. And that was when Rochelle Walensky, who was triple jabbed, caught Cowabunga 19 and was sick. I think, has she caught it more than once now? I can't be sure on that, and I wouldn't want to get censored, so I won't say. But this is Eric Shiner with his Wacky Mole, and it's a really, really good piece that he does every week on Fridays, and I want to show you his coverage of some of the craziness of the week. I think you'll enjoy this greatly.
But honestly, I kind of wanted to subpoena the former president because I got to swear everybody in. And so I thought it'd be really cool to get 60 seconds with President Trump of me looking at him and being like, do you solemnly swear? And me getting to swear him in. I kind of just thought that would be an awesome moment.
Welcome to this week's Wacky Moments of Leftist Extremism. This was a week where the leftist media introduced us to this woman, Emily Gores. She's interesting. She was a lead juror on the Trump grand jury investigating election fraud claims.
But honestly, I kind of wanted to subpoena the former president because I got to swear everybody in. And so I thought it'd be really cool to get 60 seconds with President Trump of me looking at him and being like, do you solemnly swear? And me getting to swear him in. I kind of just thought that would be an awesome moment.
That video is one of many awesome moments from her TV tour. And now the leftist media is forced to ponder their own role in ruining the possible Trump indictment that they had all dreamed of.
When this list comes out, there are no major plot twists waiting for you.
Well, former President Trump has insisted that the district attorney here is conducting a, quote, witch hunt. But look, I would expect that defense attorneys would have a field day with an interview like this.
Oh, Don, dang, he seems a little unhappy. The leftist media themselves went crazy after former President Donald Trump visited East Palestine, Ohio this week to help the citizens there after a toxic train derailment. Now, he arrived long before any officials from the Biden administration did.
Columbiana County has been Trump country. He won around 70% of the vote here in 2016 and in 2020.
So the media quickly blames Trump for the derailment. I mean, he hasn't been in office for over 2 years, but it's all his fault because the Biden White House says so.
The White House today accused the Trump administration and congressional Republicans of watering down safety rules.
The White House saying it's Trump himself that owes residents in East Palestine an apology.
The media just echoes that message, and The View adds that the people of East Palestine are getting the pain they deserve for supporting Trump.
That's who you voted for in that district. Donald Trump, who reduces all safety. He did.
Except that Joe could have changed those regulations at any time, like he did with the Keystone Pipeline or Trump's border policies. And there's also nothing that factually connects Trump's regulation rollbacks to the accident. But why mention facts?
Exactly. Exactly. Sorry, I had to jump in there. Eric's my buddy. I hope he wouldn't mind me stopping. I'll continue, though. I'll continue.
If you don't always desire more government regulations, you get what you deserve.
Because it seems to me that the Republicans are obsessed with this notion of the free market, and they don't like a lot of regulations.
So nasty, but not nearly as nasty as MSNBC is to Florida, which put Governor Ron DeSantis into office.
You run from Florida, it's all crystal meth and alligators, right? Like, I mean, that's what people think.
It might be what some liberal elites think, I suppose. I mean, I think of oranges and beaches, but, that wouldn't happen on MSNBC.
So when you see Ron DeSantis running and claiming that he's going to do for America what he's done in Florida, it seems like that'd be a problem.
I think we all know who has the problems. It's usually the leftist media who has to drag out their heroes. Those and use capitalism to profit from their book contracts while, slamming profits.
Okay, we're going to plug your book, but it's okay to be angry about capitalism. But they're going to start screaming that you're a socialist, which you are, when they see this title.
All right, but let's be clear and understand. What the book is about the massive levels of inequality in this country.
Lots of inequality. I mean, it's not fair that Bernie Sanders isn't coming to speak at every town. Some can only pay over $40 to attend his Zoom event slamming capitalism instead of having the opportunity to pay $95 to Ticketmaster to hear hear him talk about how bad capitalism is in person.
That's awesome. All right, I got to continue. Sorry.
The massive levels of inequality in this country.
Certainly massive levels of inequality in media coverage this week, especially when it comes to covering a Democrat like Biden.
Just incredible, staggering, historic scenes yesterday of President Biden.
To any member of the GOP.
There is no Republican Party. They're a dime store front for a terrorist organization.
Yeah, sure. But there's no mention of the Biden family crime organization by the big three evening networks, as Joe's son Hunter refused to cooperate with Congress, which asked for documents related to his foreign business dealings. Now, I wonder why he didn't turn those over by Wednesday's deadline. But when the president's son doesn't respond to a congressional inquiry and he might be hiding his family's criminal activity, it's just not news. They don't have questions about that. They have more important things to cover.
And we want to say congratulations to our colleague, Gayle King. The CBS Mornings co-host was presented yesterday with the Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Journalism from Arizona State University. Gayle told the audience that her dad made the family watch Cronkite on the evening news every night, and that's how she fell in love with journalism.
Well, hey, when you're watching an avowed communist or socialist, he said he was a socialist, I guess that's okay. Walter Cronkite, and that's the way it is, according to me, a socialist.
Yeah, she's such an example of the unbiased journalistic integrity that we've all come to expect from the media. Just a Democratic donor who hangs out with her friends on yachts in Tahiti. She's a journalist, to be noted for sure. I mean, that's far more important than what's going on with Hunter. I'm Eric Shiner from RCTV. If you're on YouTube wondering what's been going on with us, well, we've been in Google jail for a while. They don't seem to like us very much. Head over to Rumble to catch all the MRC TV videos that you've missed. Stop by the MRC homepage and make a donation to keep videos like this one coming. Check out mrctv.org for the latest in videos, information, and entertainment. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe to these videos. We'll be back next week with another look at leftist media madness.
Awesome, Eric. Way to go, man. Way to go, Eric. It's so funny, too, everybody, because MRC TV is relying on donations, just like, over Rockfin, it's donations and stuff like that. And this paradigm is so different than the frightened rabbit paradigm of the pop media, where Eric, I'll be talking to Eric, and he told me about the YouTube stuff, and I was like, so what do you want to do, man? He goes, we're just going to go full bore. Let's just keep rolling. I'm like, you got it, brother. Absolutely. And it's so crazy to think that the people like Joe Scarborough and so on, that somehow they're so angry about organizations like MRC TV, or they'll excoriate people who are independent journalists, like you see up in Canada, what they try to do to Rebel News. So let me get this straight. The prime minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, is claiming that people who are completely reliant only on satisfied and happy people donating to Rebel News, that somehow they're the bad guys, and that the entire superstructure that he has created and that others have created through the decades in Canada, which led to lockdowns and all sorts of actions completely contrary to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Privileges, or Rights and Freedoms, I should say, which explicitly, overtly, people could just read it out loud to him and says, oh yeah, travel from province to province is supposed to be assured. What has happened? All sorts of stuff. Freedom of speech and assembly, religion. Ask Pastor Pawlowski about that, right? Unbelievable things that these people have done, and yet they are demonizing the folks at Rebel News. Unbelievable. Google and Microsoft go after MRC TV. Anyway, you don't need to hear me talk about it too much longer, but I'd love to get your opinions, everybody. In fact, let me hop over to the Rockfin chat right now and see what's happening over there with all of you, and welcome you to the program, everybody. Anarchy Andrew is there. He said, so he's talking about credit cards, dioxin. Oh, yeah, dioxin. By the way, some people are saying, well, it was a sensible thing to burn off all that stuff. I don't know whether it was the sensible thing or not, but something that does strike me as kind of dumb is to tell people to leave and then engage in that and tell people to come back. It just is weird to me. It just doesn't make any sense. A Syrian girl says, wouldn't surprise me, but I don't want to waste my... Okay, so I'll go into this a little bit later, you guys. I saw Free Staters selling homemade moisturizer. The Survival podcast also features some episodes of entrepreneurs selling their own. Yeah, and as you know, Andrew, when you go up to Pork Fest, there's so much great stuff up there. I'm surprised that the authorities haven't tried to bust Pork Fest. Yeah, I heard lard is great moisturizer. By the way, if any of you read Handmaid's Tale, it's an okay book, but it's when it comes to freedom, it really is over the top, I think, regarding this sort of anti-male attack that somehow it's going to be this male-dominated world and so on and so forth. But that's Margaret Atwood's her thing if she wants to talk about it. One of the things that drove me nuts about this, and spoilers, not really spoilers because she never really overtly says it. It's very clearly Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's clearly Cambridge, Massachusetts. The river, the former university, Harvard. It's all there. Like I have gone through there thousands of times, and she doesn't say it. And this is this like future dystopia where some of the people still have memories of what the world was like before, and yet she seems to assume that somehow they would have forgotten the name of Cambridge and Harvard. Like, no, that wouldn't have happened. No, it's not. It hasn't been 1,000 years. It's been like 40 years, So people would remember. And it's just ridiculous. But in the story, she has the main character, the handmaid, hiding butter, little bit of butter inside the tip of a shoe. And she uses that to moisturize her fingers so that they don't crack because she has to do so much work. So, yeah, great. So anyway, I wanted to play that for you because I thought it was really, really good from Eric. He did a fantastic job. And now I want to play for you part of what we were discussing yesterday, and we're going to amplify on this right now. Let's go into our train story and go back. In fact, let's go back to Allison Goldfrapp right now. Yeah, good old Goldfrapp. Now, we're going to go back to what I showed yesterday of Pete Buttigieg making certain claims, and then I want to show that Fernanda Hernandez bit again, where she tried to talk to him. But I want to stress some of what he said here as he lost his train of thought. And this blame game, this ping pong that's been going back and forth between the two parties, the people blaming Buttigieg, the people blaming Biden, and then going to, as I mentioned, something that is lacking here, which I think is pretty important, and that is to bring up the very fact that the government influence here has led to this. And I know I stressed this before, but I want to bring in a new piece of information for you, and you might find it interesting. So yeah, let's go.
So what have your past perceived political ambitions, how have they played into the Republican response to this disaster?
Look, again, I'm here for the work and not for the politics. You can sense when you talk to local leaders and local residents that they're getting pretty sick of the politics too. And this national ideological layer that's been added into all of this when they're just trying to figure out if they're going to be safe.
All right. So as I mentioned there earlier, yesterday, as I mentioned, The very fact that he is there, his very position is attached to the polis, so it is political. It is a manifestation of money that has been extracted from other people against their will. And to say that it doesn't involve, he wants to not be involved with politics, is just incredibly deceptive and disingenuous. But I want to turn now over to in fact, let's show some of Fernanda Hernandez, a little bit of her as she tried to actually get a question in with him. So yeah, here it is. All right, here we go. And we get to see his press secretary.
Mayor Pete, why did it take you an entire 2.5 weeks to actually get here to respond to East Palestine? Will you apologize to the residents of this city for the slow response? To the government's slow response, do you have any apology?
I'm a press person, I can help you.
Sure. So can we ask why it took him almost 3 weeks to get here?
I'm sorry, I don't want to do this on camera.
What was his personal time off while there was a tragedy happening here?
And can we also ask too why he waited until President Donald Trump came here to actually make an appearance? This is a very important question that people across America would like to know.
I'm happy to have a conversation with you. I do not want to be on camera.
Well,
please put your cameras away.
I'm sorry, we're on a public area, so we are allowed as press.
You guys, I would like you guys to turn your cameras off.
You're not on my camera.
Well, I'm on a camera. I would like your cameras to be off, and then I'm happy to talk to you guys.
You know what really gets me is the big dude in the blue, the Wilford Brimley lookalike guy. You would think that anybody with even a modicum of common sense would shut up and let these reporters ask the question of the tax-funded person who already said, why don't you leave Pete Buttigieg alone, come talk to me, while they had their cameras out. And then she changes the parameters to say, no, don't talk to me that way. How about doing that? How about just addressing the fact that she is the aggressor there and she's gaslighting those people, and Wilford Brimley, the walrus there, is adding to the problem. He didn't force, but he asked. Well, she asked you not to. It's like just unbelievable. These people are insufferable. And this is exactly the kind of thing that happens to so many parents and so many taxpayers when they go to school board meetings and they have questions, and then they're depicted as the ones who are the aggressors, like Merrick Garland did. Oh, they're potential terrorist threats. No, they're just asking questions. And you're the people who have the political power over them to be able to shut them up and put them into jail if they don't pay their taxes. What is wrong with you people? Crazy.
If you're the press secretary of the Secretary of the Department of Transportation, don't you think you should be able to ask questions from the American public that you serve?
Absolutely. I would like to do it without the camera on.
Can I ask why?
I think that is a little bit aggressive. That's why.
Why is it aggressive?
Aggressive?
I'm on behalf of the American people, I'm just asking why he has not been here until Donald Trump came.
She's asked several times for them to turn the cameras off, and they will not do it.
And then they got the cops over there, and the guy's now turning to the cops, and they will not do it. But luckily, at least the cop, and as tax-funded as the cop is, she didn't turn to the people with the cameras and tell them they have to stop. She turned to the Buttigieg assistant and said, if you're not happy with this, why don't you just walk away?
She's been able to walk away. Would you like to go inside? I do not. I will walk this way.
Can I ask what the secretary is going to do with the picture of Jenny Terror? He took her the other day when she was asking a question in Washington, D.C.
I'm happy to anscer your questions. I would like you guys
to answer your question.
I turned my camera off a minute ago. If I turn it off,
you all have your cameras on. I can see them. You guys, I'm happy to have this conversation.
Oh, man. No, she's not happy to have that conversation. Now let's talk about lies. But, actually, before we even talk about the lies, let me go into this. I think you'll find this pretty darn interesting. All right. Talking about the train thing. The National Transportation Safety Board Chair, Jennifer Homendy, is, as they say it by Daily Caller, throwing cold water on Biden administration claims that Trump is to blame for Ohio derailment. Okay? So, as you probably heard, a lot of the Democrats, including Pete Buttigieg, first he said, well, these derailments, there are 1,000 of these every year. I mean, they're happening all over the place. I mean, trains are just jumping off the tracks. They're dancing with each other. It's crazy. We don't know how to control them. In fact, I don't even think rail transportation is really even something that has a future. I don't think it's going anywhere, this whole rail thing. You know, I mean, they might want to test it for a couple of years, but nah, it's, you know, 1,000 derailments, never mentioning, and I don't know if I phrased this well last night, never mentioning the fact that when he's talking about derailments, what he's discussing is not a derailment where the cars actually go off and fall over and crash into each other, but a derailment where the wheels dislodge from the rails. That's what happens 1,000 times a year, not these massive accidents like what happened in East Palestine, Ohio, which has caused all this dissension and worry for all these different people who live in the area. Not that. But what's interesting is if they claimed that this was Trump's fault for lifting this regulation, this safety regulation, then they've had 2 years. Why, if there were 1,000 derailments, didn't they get on top of reimposing their wonderful, magical regulation that would protect everybody and make the world safe for rail? Clearly, they weren't animated about it, were they? And the reason they weren't was because they weren't having all sorts of accidents. But here is a little bit more to give you the info from the Daily Caller. Brianna Lyman writes, a Biden official tossed cold water on claims from both the Biden administration and those on the left that former President Donald Trump is to blame for the Ohio train derailment. I'm not to blame for the train derailment. We're going to have the best derailments under my new administration. I'm going to put my hands out like this a little bit. I noticed Ron DeSantis does the same sort of thing. It's sort of like a mafia thing. Maybe it's a New York thing. I don't know, but it's the best way to do my hands. Like this. We're going to have really, really great. We're going to have the best great hand gestures of all time. The best emergency powers. I'm going to declare a lot more emergencies. A lot more emergencies. We're going to have emergencies for Peanuts anniversaries, Charlie Brown Day. We're going to have an emergency for New Wave Remembrance Day. All these things. We're going to have emergencies for all of them. Anyway, here it is. A Norfolk Southern train carrying toxic chemicals derailed February 3rd. And the toxic chemical thing is kind of key here because, as I mentioned, when the government sets certain standards, then the rail lines will go up to those standards and no higher. It actually makes things less safe. February 3rd near East Palestine, Ohio, prompting evacuations and shelter-in-place orders throughout the town. Officials have said it is safe for residents to return to the town and that the air and water are safe, though residents have expressed skepticism, and requested the federal government to do more. Yeah, you know, maybe they could get the former governor of New Jersey who then hooked up with the George W. Bush administration and told everybody, it's totally safe near Ground Zero. Totally safe. Maybe they could get that going there. That's, you know, it's like Jaws. Totally fine in the water. Everybody go back into the ocean. It's great. Come on down for vacation. Don't listen to Roy Scheider. No way. And by the way, Anarchy Andrew, I noticed you mentioned Sequest DSV. Yeah, that was a cool show. The first season of it was first like few episodes. It was pretty cool. It was like Star Trek underwater. It was neat. Anyway, White House Deputy Press Secretary Andrew Bates said Republicans and the Trump administration, quote, owe East Palestine an apology for selling them out to rail industry lobbyists when they dismantled Obama-Biden rail safety protections as well as EPA powers to rapidly contain spills. Oh, I see. So let's get this straight. The government is in charge of the safety orders. Then the government responded, according to you guys, the government responded, according to White House Deputy Press Secretary Andrew Bates. Does he have a motel? How's his mom doing? She wouldn't hurt a fly. Anyway. Oh, man. So you got to have the government regulations in there to keep everything safe. And then when the government is so-called regulating, in other words, it's a euphemism for threats of violence and government fines and things like that, then the industries that are affected by the regulations have an incentive to then try to lobby the people in government to try to lower the standards, which then saves them money, and you get regulatory capture. So this guy's complaining about regulatory capture, and what is he not addressing? The fact that the very presence of the regulatory state invites the capture. We'll continue. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. When they dismantled Obama-Biden rail safety protections, as well as EPA powers to rapidly contain spills. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg has also tried to lay blame on the Trump administration, arguing Trump withdrew an Obama-era protocol that would have required a special braking system for trains carrying highly flammable materials. Remember that now, highly flammable materials, because there's a code for that. Yes. National Transportation Safety Board Chair Jennifer Homendy dismissed the allegations while speaking Thursday on CNN. Quote, "Yet, even with the 20 cars with toxic materials under current safety rules, that train still did not qualify for designation as a high-hazard flammable train, which would have gotten it or required at least a newer, safer braking system." So that rule, as it stands right now, clearly was inadequate for the citizens of East Palestine, host Jake Tapper said. Why not add the newer braking system to any train carrying hazardous material, not just those with more than 20 cars of hazardous material? So Jake actually let the cat out of the bag there. The NTSB has looked at electronically controlled pneumatic braking for a number of years, and we did some testing as well. Well, that's so good. If you want to run your own rail system and try to get it through private property, you go ahead. You see, there you can see if the government wanted to do it, they could form their own private company, get out of the government business, and see what the insurance companies and the private landowners nearby would require. But instead, they impose these things, and everybody's screwed. Certainly, it would improve safety, she said, but for this investigation and for this derailment, the ECP, electronically controlled pneumatic brakes, would not have prevented the derailment. The wheel bearing failed on car number 23. How interesting. Car number 23. Illuminati confirmed. So even with ECP brakes, the derailment would have occurred. The fire would have ensued, and the 5 vinyl chloride tank cars would have had to be vented and burned, Homendy said. Is there any obvious rule change that would have prevented this? Tapper pressed. It's too early to tell. In our analysis phase of the investigation, we look at just that. We'll look at what could have prevented this terrible tragedy, and it could be regulation changes, Homendy replied. Well, then you're not going to be preventing the tragedy unless those regulations involved getting in a TARDIS and going back in time. You mean future, and that is your assumption, when it probably won't. And we don't know. We don't know the balance between savings and expenses, safety and efficiency that only the market can produce through trial and error, private property respect, torts, insurance, liabilities, and market response by consumers who want their product. It could be recommendations to Norfolk Southern, to the Department of Transportation, or to rail car manufacturers, or to emergency responders. But again, it's too early to tell. And just to mention, the NTSB does not have regulatory authority. So here's a little bit from her Twitter. Some are saying the ECP, electronically controlled pneumatic brake rule, if implemented, would have prevented this derailment. False. Here's why. The ECB braking rule would have applied only to high hazard flammable trains. And here you see they go up to the limit that the government establishes. It has nothing to do with real liability. It's a government arbitrary standard, and they are covered up to that point. Now, as I mentioned, because this has become so high profile, the government is making an exception here, and they are going to try to get money from the rail line. But you can bet that that money is not going to go to the local people. It's going to go to the federal government and to the state government, and maybe a little bit to the local government if they speak out loudly enough. But the local people are probably going to get big goose eggs out of this. When if you had a private paradigm and they could sue, they would be able to sue. But no, they won't be able to do this individually, unless maybe the government comes up with an exception if it gets really, really bad. They might allow for suits with that. But I don't know. In the past, that has not happened very much when it comes to allowing people to actually get money on a private tort system. The government grabs the money and it goes back to the government, not the people. The train that derailed in East Palestine was a mixed freight train, as I mentioned the other day, containing only 3 placarded Class 3 flammable liquid cars. There you go. So, wanted to bring that one up, make sure that I brought that to you because I thought it was a pretty big deal. And I'll show you just a little bit more in just a minute of some rail stuff. Well, maybe later, but right now I want to go to, you know what, the lies of Kamala Harris.
You want to know why? 'Cause I'm a liar! Yeah, I'm a liar! I'll tear your mind out! I'll burn your soul! I'll turn you into me! I'll turn you into me! 'Cause I'm a liar! A liar! A liar! A liar!
Yeah. And where's Kamala? Here she is. Let's listen to what Kamala Harris has to say about the economy. And I'm thinking I'm going to try to blow this up a little bit for you. I'll make it a little bit bigger. Yeah, here we go. Check this out.
Joe Biden and I talk about and work together with our partners like former leader Hoyer, current leader Hoyer, to lower the cost for the people of our nation, because you are a leader. For working families, we have reduced heating and electricity bills. So folks have more money in their pocket to buy things like school supplies, replace the dishwasher, or take a family vacation.
All right. To lower heating and energy bills and to allow people to have some more money left in their pocket so that they can, get a new appliance or go on a vacation, that sort of thing. Go on a vacation now that Joe Biden has lifted the lockdown. Oh, no, not yet, right? Because if you leave the country, you're going to have your jab status and all that stuff. If you're a trucker, that's going to continue. So let's just take a look at some of the economic claims that she made and find out just what she exactly means. Well, first, we'll mention that Fox News has a piece, and I found this after I started to do my own analysis of it. But I thought I'd bring it up to you because I thought it was pretty funny. Harris bashed for bragging that Biden has lowered electricity and heating bills, alternate reality. Now, I could give this to you after I go through the stuff that I pulled up for my analysis and so on. But I do want to just hit this a little bit just to give you the fact that a lot of other people, as you know, as I know, responded to this with utter disbelief. Social media users ridiculed Vice President Kamala Harris for claiming that the Biden administration was lowering heating and electricity bills so they can buy extra school supplies or take that vacation they've always wanted. They missed one major portion of that, Fox News, and I think that might have been intentional. I don't know. Twitter critics called her out for the claim, stating she was describing an alternate reality or lying to the American people who are still feeling the economic pain that has characterized the 2 years of the Biden administration has been in office. Well, as it turns out, everybody, since yesterday and what I put together, there is more information that's just come out. Breitbart reports it. Biden inflation jumps higher as prices rise at fastest pace in 6 months. So I'll go into the details that I put together yesterday in a little while. I want to give you this one again as a sort of a second blush. First blush was that from the online responses of people. But here's Breitbart's John Carney writing, a key measure of consumer prices showing inflation accelerating in January is spending, income, and savings A key measure of consumer prices showed inflation accelerating in January as spending, income, and saving surged. The personal consumption expenditure price index jumped 0.6% in January compared with a month earlier, the Commerce Department said Friday. The prior month's inflation rate was revised up from 0.1% to 0.2%, which is always what happens. They always revise upward, and if you had the old newspaper, that would be hidden amongst the obituaries, and nobody would see how the revision had shown that, in fact, the economy was not as good as people had said. That's always the way it works. That is, I remember I did a podcast about this, about statistics being constantly manipulated like Orwell's Ministry of Truth. They'll give you really glowing information, then a month later, they'll revise employment downward and inflation upward. But technically speaking, we're not really talking about inflation here. Of course, we're talking about the price increases resultant from the inflating of the money supply. But one more bit here, this is the key. Compared with a year ago, the personal consumption expenditure PCE price index was up 5.4%. The 12-month gain for December was revised up from 5% to 5.3%. Economists had expected a much milder increase. The median forecast was for a 0.4% price increase month to month and a 4.9% increase for the year. So you remember when I went through that and I mentioned how, we're seeing increases even when they said that the rate of inflation was not going up as rapidly. That didn't mean there was no more inflation. That just meant that the rate of increase had decreased. You're still in a car that's accelerating on that highway. You're just not going between 0 and 60 within 5 seconds. Now you're going from 60 to 100 in 10 seconds, let's say. Okay? You're still going faster and faster, and you want to bail out of that car, right? Because unfortunately, you're not given the freedom to drive on the government-run roads in your electric vehicle. So there is something else that needs to be addressed here. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But first, I want to mention that when Kamala Harris said that the economy was getting better, and she was bashed for bragging about how they had lowered electricity and heating bills, what people don't discuss is that in the wintertime, gas prices are traditionally at their lowest. So as you'll see, this coming from convenience.org, the Advanced Convenience and Fuel Retailing Organization. February 2022, traditionally gas prices, and I don't know why people don't take, whatever, I was just interested to find out. I was like, well, I'm sure it would take like a tenth of a second to look up the information on seasonal gas prices. Here it is, traditionally gas prices, and it's something that we all knew. You hear summer gas travel, summer travel is at its highest, gasoline is really expensive. Traditionally, gas prices are at their lowest during the first week of February and then begin to climb, often peaking right before Memorial Day. But in 2021, higher oil prices pushed gas prices higher and prices continued to climb at a time when they traditionally decline. So that right there tells you, of course, it would be very easy for her to say, well, we got prices down. Well, she tried to make the claim, but even that wasn't right. And I'll refer you to this. There's even more. If you do a Google search, January 24th, 2023, why electricity prices likely won't cool with overall inflation. January 11th, 2023, why your gas bill might be way higher this winter. This one from January 10th, 2023, U.S. wholesale power prices broadly expected to fall this year. Yeah, we will see. That depends on demand. So there you go. That's interesting, but there's something else that I want to stress. And I actually called into Grace Curley's program today to talk to Grace about it on her program on WRKO and a number of other stations. Let's go back with Kamala and get to her claim. As she says, they worked so hard to bring down prices so that people can go out and buy these great things.
Joe Biden and I talk about and work together with our partners like former leader Hoyer, current leader Hoyer, to lower the cost for the people of our nation, because you are a leader. For working families, we have reduced heating and electricity bills.
False, 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 false.
So folks have more money in their pocket to buy things like school supplies, replace the dishwasher, or take a family vacation.
Okay, so they're working really hard to bring down that dishwasher price, right? Really? Well, let's see. Oh, look. Why Biden is keeping Trump's China tariffs in place. This one from January 26, 2022. You see, originally Biden said he was going to pull down those tariffs that, Trump put in place, as I've mentioned, for the folks in Ohio who are supposedly represented by Senator Robert Portman, one of them, who lobbied very hard with the Trump administration to have Trump impose tariffs on a lot of Chinese appliances, because a lot of appliances are made in Ohio. Maytag, Westinghouse, a lot of those appliances are made in Ohio, and they don't like lower price competition. But by doing this, the government is essentially forcing you to have to be captive to those rent-seeking corporations based in Ohio, because now you're not able to save the money that you would normally save if you freely chose to get what you wanted, which might be a foreign product. Instead, they're making that product more expensive so that they, in the United States, with all these government regulations and unions and all these other things, minimum wage laws, all these protective things, make them more expensive. So you can't get it from elsewhere at the lower price and save the money that you could have saved. I thought, however, that Kamala Harris was really interested in saving people money. I thought that they were going to be able to get that. She said she was working really hard so they could buy that extra appliance, that new appliance. Well, then why is it that the Biden administration is continuing with the Trump administration tariffs against foreign goods? Here's what CNN says. Back a year ago, President Joe Biden reversed a number of the Trump administration's policies during his first year in office, but he has left tariffs in place on $350 billion of Chinese goods that were imposed by his predecessor. $350 billion worth of tariffs. That is money extracted from those consumers that who says should be able to buy their appliances. Unbelievable. It's just insufferable. They're incredible. I mean, the raw, intense indignation of these lies that we should feel, that one could feel about these lies, is just stunning. It's amazing. But in the same way that they don't care about you being able to get any more for your money, they also don't seem to care about other things. Let's go with another little theme here, shall we? Yeah, I think it's time for us to talk about, let's talk about world destruction.
Every day, Joe Biden and I talk about and work together with our partners like former leader Hoyer, current leader Hoyer, to lower the cost for the people of our nation, because you are a leader. For working families, we have reduced heating and electricity bills. So folks have more money in their pocket to buy things like school supplies, replace the dishwasher, or take a family vacation. Every day.
They're just thieves. They're just thieves. And they're warmongers.
This is a world destruction. Your life ain't nothing. The human race is becoming a disgrace. Countries are fighting in chemical warfare, giving a damn about the people who live. Hit before destruction. Is it nuclear war? What are you asking for? World destruction. Your life ain't nothing. The human race is becoming a disgrace. The rich get richer, the poor are getting poorer. Fascist, chauvinistic government fool.
All right, let's look at the fascist, chauvinistic government idiocy coming out of Washington. They're pulling exactly like I mentioned before. They're pulling the Soviet tactics of taking people's property without any form of jurisprudence, totally extrajudicial. Here is the latest story. We heard that they were going to try to do this, and now these people are proudly saying, look, U.S. prosecutors seize properties, charge Russian on Ukraine invasion anniversary. And then we get this one. U.S. unveils new sanctions on Russia and China, calls for ceasefire as Zelensky praises his invincible country. So let's go with this one first. Russia's invasion of Ukraine reached its first anniversary Friday as the United States announced new military support for Kiev, proxy war, unconstitutional, and sanctions against the Kremlin. In other words, stopping people from actually participating in free trade with other people in other countries. The kind of thing that, killed 500,000 people in Iraq. And Madeleine Albright said it was totally worth it. While President Volodymyr Zelensky praised his invincible country and vowed to push for victory. Yes, drink that victory gin there, Zelensky. It's good to know that you love Big Brother. The world marked 1 year since Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine. What do they mark 9 years, 10 years since Ukrainian Kiev tanks rolled into the Donbass? Since, the Azov battalion slaughtered thousands? Anyway, strangely, it's a new phase of a war that began raging since 2014. Really? Really? Oh, yeah, that's right. That's when the U.S. government imposed its favorite government in Ukraine and started to expand NATO even further into Ukraine. So, by the way, I got some more information on the tariffs thing. I'll tell you about that in a minute. U.S. prosecutors seize properties, charge Russian on Ukraine invasion anniversary. This is from Reuters. Oh, look, there's Merrick Garland. The guy who says that parents are terrorist threats and stuff, Yeah, the guy who, saw people in the U.S. government working with the National School Boards Association to come up with a prefabricated, fictitious, bogus letter that the National School Boards Association wrote to the Justice Department to claim that they were worried about these parents who were going to the school board things. That's Merrick Garland, the guy, by the way, who was intimately involved in hiding a lot of key information, as we discussed last night with Chris Graves and Angry Tiger and Jason Barker on last night's program regarding the Oklahoma City bombing in the mid-90s. But we'll continue here. Here is a little bit more. U.S. prosecutors on Friday said they were seeking to forfeit 6 properties in New York and Florida allegedly belonging to a sanctioned, see those terms, forfeit and sanctioned. Where in the U.S. Constitution does it say that any government, particularly the federal government, can impose what they call sanctions on individuals or other countries, but in particular, a sanctioned Russian so-called oligarch? You see how many loaded terms they have here? None of this is defined. It's all buying into a government narrative. Well, he's a Russian oligarch. Really? Oh, it was, he's been sanctioned. What does that mean? Don't know. He's going to have to forfeit his 6 properties. In other words, he owns property. He's from another country. The government doesn't like that country, and they're going to take his stuff without any due process whatsoever. And due process is not something that is only afforded to Americans. As I said, the Constitution doesn't say the United States can't do X, Y, or Z, but if it's against a foreigner, it can. It only writes, and again, I'm an anarchist, I'm a voluntarist. I didn't sign the Constitution, but I'm just reminding these people of what they tell us they're going to abide by, to leave a preposition dangling. The Constitution applies to the United States government's interactions with anybody. It doesn't matter where they are. It doesn't matter who they are. That's the point. You're not supposed to eavesdrop on foreigners, just like FISA allows, and then they use their tentacles to get at everybody. They're not supposed to have secret star chambers. You're supposed to have due process for everybody. It doesn't matter. So this is a clear example of the United States engaging in the exact same types of things that the Soviets did in 1917 when they took over, taking people's property. This is precisely what Ayn Rand said she witnessed. The goons coming into her father's shop, busting through the door and taking his stuff. But, as I said, it's always takings with the government. The larger philosophical point is that the government already assumes it can take. It doesn't matter. Taxation is extrajudicial. People don't seem to question that. You're being punished. You have to pay something. It's a fine to the government. If you don't pay, you're going to have a bigger fine. It's all extrajudicial. And the judicial process itself requires you to pay for it. How is that just? Even if you had the judicial process, you'd still be paying the taxes even if you won. So the government always wins. It's like the casino. It always wins. It never loses. It's all set up. The bank is the casino. The feds are the casino. And here's a little bit more. The announcements came on the anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which Moscow calls a special military operation. The Department of Justice has sought to use asset seizures and criminal charges to squeeze business executives aligned. I mean, how many more loaded terms could they use here at Reuters? Aligned with Russian President Vladimir Putin to press him to stop the war. And here's the Department of Justice. For as long as it takes, the Department of Justice will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with our Ukrainian and international partners in defense of justice and the rule of law. I was just blown away. I read that earlier and I was like, and I forgot. Merrick Garland, the rule of law. There is no connection to any rule of law. And just to be philosophical again, everybody, in John Locke's second treatise, he talks about how he argues that in the state of nature becomes a state, it's sort of a Hobbesian argument. The state of nature without government there, without the state, becomes a state of war. When one person threatens your private property, he is engaging in a state of war against you. And so his tautological argument then is, so therefore a group of people, therefore all people agree, he assumes all people agree, to come together to form a government which will be able to engage in the state of war against you. That's exactly what he argues. In order to avoid the state of war person on person, you create this artificial entity called the state, which can only exist by engaging in the state of war against you. He's just made it bigger. He's maximized it. And he's excused it as if that is somehow moral. And somehow, in his fantasy world, everybody's agreed to it. No, the social contract doesn't exist. The social contract is an impediment on the you are included in the we thing. It is an act of aggression. It's not a contract. You can have real contract in society, but society is separate from the state. There is no such thing as a government contract, because the minute it becomes a contract between you, the citizen, and the government, it's no longer a government. That's a business. You're hiring somebody, and it's only you, which is, again, as I point out in the opening of the Constitution, we the people of the United States. That's a lie. It's not we the people. They can't sign for anybody else except themselves, or if anybody said, yes, please sign for me. They could say, we the signers of this, and those people who have agreed we are representing. But that would be it. And they would have to have a record of all those people. The whole thing is bogus. Lysander Spooner spelled it out very, very clearly in his essay called No Treason, the Constitution of No Authority. He went through a morally binding contract. The Constitution is not. But even there, he's talking about the rule of law. No, what Attorney General Merrick Garland is discussing there is the rule of statute that they have made up. It's more kabuki theater. It's more witch doctorism. They've made up these statutes, or they're going by executive orders that say, oh, we can just take your stuff. It's like Donald Trump. Oh, yeah, we got Operation Warp Speed. It's an emergency. We can just take people's stuff. We can get stuff out through the military. Emergency authorization. We can have the FDA. That's totally fine. It exists somewhere in the Constitution. No, it doesn't. It doesn't exist. The whole thing is a sham. Attorney General Merrick Garland is a criminal. He is an absolute, utter criminal. He's a bald-faced liar. Justice and the rule of law. Are you kidding me? You're using that as an argument. Can you imagine like a bunch of robbers going around in everybody's neighborhood and saying, "Oh yeah, we're coming in your house right now. We're gonna take your blender, that appliance. Did you get that from China? Well, we're gonna take it anyway. Yeah, the meat in your freezer. We're gonna take that too. That's probably contributing somehow to global warming. Let's see now. Oh yeah. Well, you're going for cryptocurrency, right? Yeah, you've been doing it. No. We detected higher elevated electrical use here. Oh, no, what's that? Oh, you just need to have bright lights because your eyesight is bad? Well, we'll take the lights too. Unbelievable. Federal prosecutors in Manhattan, here it is. It's civil. This is exactly, it's like the drug war. Federal prosecutors in Manhattan said they had filed civil forfeiture complaints against New York and Florida properties collectively worth $75 million that it said were owned by Victor Veckelsberg, whom the United States sanctioned. See, it's an object preposition there. Whom did they sanction? They sanctioned him, not he. They sanctioned him, an object preposition, whom the United States sanctioned in 2018 over alleged Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. election, which, of course, was bogus, and again in 2022 over his ties to Putin over the invasion of Ukraine. Can you believe this guy? I mean, it is just so full of criminal elements. It's beyond belief. Now, before I do anything else, I do want to bring this up. I forgot to bring this up when I was talking about the tariff thing. So just to give you an idea of what we're talking about on tariffs, again, you know me, it's not morally acceptable in the first place, and that's all it needs to be considered. Government is immoral. People telling you can't buy something from someone in a peaceful way, that is immoral. Whatever justification they give, it is immoral. It doesn't matter. And I know that they talk about, well, national defense, we'll be losing this industry or that industry. And, then what happens if, China wants to ramp up and invade and so on and so forth? Well, your industry would be going to be much better off if you don't have to buy stuff at 8,000 times the price and you can get it for cheaper, right? You'll be much better prepared. But second of all, even if they stopped selling you stuff that was very dependent for your national defense and that sort of thing, if they stop selling it to you, what are they no longer getting? Money. So they got to sell to somebody, right? So, and look at this. The amazing thing is that the United States is putting up sanctions against Russians for energy and destroying our ability to be able to help ourselves. The government is not hurt by this. As you saw, when they imposed those sanctions against Iraq, didn't harm the Iraqi government at all. They've done this in Somalia, right? In Somalia, we saw that they're calling the United States war criminals now because of their sanctions. And of course, they've got ridiculous inflation there, which is their own fault. But here's a little bit of information from the Tax Foundation about tariffs. The Section 232 tariffs on imports of steel and aluminum raised the cost of production for manufacturers, reducing employment in those industries, raising prices for consumers, and hurting exports. The jobs so-called saved in the steel producing industries from the tariffs came at a high cost to consumers. As I mentioned, if you really want to read one of the best books ever written on this subject, read James Bovaard's The Fair Trade Fraud. Please read it. It's truth. It's incredibly important. The jobs, quote, saved in the steel producing industries from the tariffs came at a high cost to consumers at roughly $650,000 per job saved, according to the Peterson Institute of International Economics. And you might have heard me interview James Bovaard about this. Consumers lose about 8 times as much as the particular industry or industries that the government is trying to help by imposing these foreign tariffs. And there are so many tariffs. As you know, if you heard the interview that I did with James Bovaard about how he got his hands on the massive stack of documents on all the tariffs that are imposed by the federal government, that a lot of them we don't even know. He discovered tariffs against French lingerie, against foreign dairy, of course, Cuban sugar, all sorts of things. Unbelievably nonsensical stuff. According to Tax Foundation estimates, repealing these Section 232 tariffs would increase long-run GDP by 0.02% and create more than 4,000 jobs. Other estimates, such as those from economists Lydia Cox and Katie Russ, suggest that job losses from the tariffs were as high as 75,000. There is a lot to be said here. So, Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum enacted in 2018 under the Trump administration and continued under the Biden administration fall into this camp of harmful economic policies. This paper provides an overview of Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum and shows how they have harmed the U.S. economy. Using the Tax Foundation's general equilibrium model, we estimate that repealing the tariffs would boost long-run GDP and create thousands of jobs. And they go into a lot of this stuff. Since it began, the Department of Commerce has authorized 31 trade investigations, ruling in about half of the cases that the imports in questions so-called threatened national security. Nonetheless, in several of these cases, the president did not act, and the remedies were rarely tariffs. Prior to the Trump administration, the latest presidential action under Section 232 occurred in 1986 when President Reagan signed voluntary export restraint agreements with trade partners. So there's a lot more to this, but they'll just use that threatening of national security. It's sort of like the way they used national security as an excuse for the interstate highway system, and that was done for it was a political pork system. That's all it was. It had nothing to do with national defense. It was ridiculous. So I want to give you one final piece of information before we head over to some fiction, everybody. And I want to stop over in the chat too. But this is my latest piece at my Substack. There's a variant of this over at the MRC TV site, but I want to give this one to you. There's a recent study that reiterates there is not enough mineral matter on the planet Earth for so-called renewables to replace petrochemical energy. And the subhead that I have here is the oil, gas, coal energy system, the internal combustion engine, are far more cost effective than the greenie gang's plans for our lives under falsely titled renewables. Both Counterpunch.org and The New American offer valuable coverage of an important study detailing not just the self-defeating power and resource requirements pervading every level of the inefficient so-called green energy chain, but which also reminds interested parties that there is not enough mineral matter to replace storable, burnable oil and gas as fuel. As Selwyn Duke of The New American writes, many points are made when discussing the green energy agenda's infeasibility. It has been noted that wind and solar can't provide our energy needs, that powering the United States with wind and solar require an area 3 times California's size. It has further been asserted that electric car production and use actually cause more pollution than the gasoline status quo. It's not just that electric vehicles manufacture creates massive releases of CO2, not a pollutant, mind you, either. It's also that the mining of the metals and minerals required for their production causes environmental damage. Yet there's a kicker here, too, a point seldom made. Even if we could more cleanly and efficiently mine the materials in question, there simply aren't enough of them to make green energy a reality. Duke credits Counterpunch's Robert Hunziker, who last year revealed details from a study by Simon Michaud, PhD, of the Geographical Survey, Finland, exposing what would be necessary to phase out fossil fuels in favor of so-called renewables. Offered Michaud, quote, "The quantity of metal required to make just one generation of renewable tech units to replace fossil fuels is much larger than first thought. Current mining production of these metals is not even close to meeting demand. Current reported mineral reserves are also not enough in size. Most concerning is copper as one of the flagged shortfalls." Duke also tips his hat to American thinkers Robert A. Bishop, who February 18th noted, quote, "Copper is an integral part of a high voltage grid system, coming up short by a shocking 3.7 billion tons. Can we dig enough open mile deep ore pits to meet that shortfall? Improbable." And I write, Bishop refers to Michaud's analysis of lithium production requirements for the so-called renewable field to come close to meeting current petrochemical energy provision, not to mention any upward trend in demand. Quote, "For example, lithium would take almost 10 millennia to achieve. In addition, these scarce minerals must be mined, transported, and processed, relying exclusively on fossil fuels, which would create more carbon emissions and deplete hydrocarbon reserves." Bishop also writes, quote, "Petrochemicals from oil and natural gas make over 6,000 everyday products indispensable in modern society." And I write, and both Duke and Bishop note that the Ukraine backing US, NATO, EU proxy war tactic of blocking Russian energy has pulled the mask off the ugly reality of collectivist green power agenda Quote, "Europe's embargo of Russian oil and natural gas, along with the terroristic sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines, is exposing the myth of green energy. As a result, Germany, the poster child for green energy, has resorted to heresy by reactivating its mothballed coal-fired power plants." And I said, and like a marionette, Greta Thunberg recently pranced around one of the German coal mines, evidently adamant that Germans should continue to struggle to heat their homes. She also denies the reality of the efficiency, portability, and storage capacity of petrochemical-based energy that far surpasses anything renewables can offer. Writes Bishop, quote, "When Michaud presented basic information to EU analysts, it was a shock to them. To their dismay, they had not put together the various mineral metal data requirements to phase out fossil fuels and be replaced by renewables. They assumed using guesstimates the metals would be available." I said, which is typical of politically connected pushers of the green agenda. They focus on their goals, one of which is control of our lives, another of which is tax-based policy that will demand penance from businesses and civilians who dare stray from the primrose greeny path. Bishop distills additional important details from the Michaud study, including the unreliable nature of wind and solar, which encounter long and unexpected periods of intermittency when nature doesn't allow the utopian power generation humans desire. And he adds, quote, "One factor that will influence what materials and systems are used to build out renewables is the fact that EVs require a battery that is 3.2 times the mass of the equivalent of a hydrogen fuel tank. Therefore, An analysis of EVs versus hydrogen fuel cells indicates it'll be necessary to build out the global fleet with EVs for city traffic and hydrogen fuel cells for all long-range vehicles like semi-trailers, rails, and maritime shipping. And I'll finish with this. The entire renewable build-out requires 36,000 terawatt hours to operate, meaning 586,000 new non-fossil fuel power stations of average size. The current fleet of power stations is only 46,000, meaning worldwide, meaning it will take 10 times the current number of power stations yet to be built. It'll be more than that. It's 11 times. How does that translate to any form of imagined supply in daily human activity? The new annual energy capacity of 36,007.9 terawatt hours will supply 29 million EV buses, 603 million commercial EV. I won't even go into it. There's so much more. You can check out my Substack if you want to. I don't want to bore you with it. Thank you for the heart on that, whoever did that. I really appreciate it. I see somebody commented there. Let me go down to the bottom. Martin writes, the same fools that push solar energy are in the same camp of tools that are purposely lessening solar gain via their chemical haze. Oh, yes, I see what you're saying. Yes, putting out material through the chemtrails. Yeah. So listen, hopefully that's been interesting for y'all. I want to go into Rockfin, see what's happening in Rockfin. Tom Cooper, thank you, man. Andrew, I don't think I can hang out tomorrow, but I want to drop you a line or send you. I got to get your phone number thing from where you put it before. But you can hit me up. I think you've got my email. It's elggrande@msn.com. It's lggrande@msn.com. And if you watch this, if you didn't get it, just rewind or whatever. elggrande@msn.com. Oh yeah, the Foxhole show was great. Assyrian Girl, so true. So I'm going back. We have Tom Cooper, Assyrian Girl, JB Morrison. JB, good to have you here. Rock on. This is great. I love being able to check in on things. I know I want to check in more, and I want to check a lot more of what people have to say. I paid $6.29 at Shaw's, which is a grocery store. I might get better since I discount packy. So I'm going to go back up here. If you guys want me to mention anything, if you have anything, bring it up right now. Throw it right in there. JB says, hello, AG. I see, talking about some Merlot wine, that sort of thing. Assyrian Girl, I used to believe we were a people protected by rule of law. I know now that was naive, but I still believe only criminals break just laws, like government and agencies. You're awesome. This is great. So true. By the way, I think I got to get a new chair or something because I've been getting like a lot of wicked back pains, as they would say in Dorchester. Wicked back pains, guy. Statute law, which is mostly color of law. Yes. Very, very good addition to the thought process on that. Absolutely. Key. For guard, there's a YouTube watch thing here. I got to check this out. I wonder what that is, Tom. You have to let me know. I'm curious now. I won't click on it. I'm over on the second computer in the Rockfin chat, Tom. So I'll check that out later on my first computer on the link. But thanks, man. I'll check that out.